And we are ready to go for the part of my dad's oral history, talking about now. We're still in Belfast, Ireland, and Dad's going to start talking about his apprenticeship as a young teen.
Okay. In Ireland, every big business had apprentices, different from here. So when you had friends that were in the same school or in the same class or you played with, the question used to be, what do you want to be when you grow up? I mean, think of that. Here you ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Says, I don't have a clue. Where will I go? And there you could be a carpenter, you could be a machinist, you could be anything you wanted, that there was businesses in the community. So all that was always open for young people coming out of school. What do you want to be? And they were always looking for apprentices. They were always in short supply. So that's where I found myself when I got out of school. What am I going to do? Well, I left school like at 13. And I explained to her it was when I fell and broke my wrist and the guy left me hanging by the feet. She got that part. And so, okay. So now I left school with nothing. And for maybe about 6 months, I had one of these bikes, had the big wheel and the small wheel on front with the big basket. And so you work for a grocery. And anybody who had ordered them, put them in the basket and said, take them to so-and-so house where they lived. And they would give you a little tip, which never was very much, but it was something. There was no questions asked about scholastic ability or anything like that. They took you happily. And so that's the way it was there. But I didn't want to be riding around on a tricycle all my life. So what do I want to be? So my brother, he was a French polisher. He wanted to get into that, so he was an apprentice, French polisher. My other brother was a sheet metal worker, and so he had already had an apprenticeship going for about a year. And I'm just, who do I talk to at the biggest shipyard in the world? With all of the jobs, everything, we did everything on a ship. The only thing they got was the metal plates, and they punched the holes and all of that stuff, and did all of the actual furnishings and carpenters. They had all of that stuff. But I thought, well, I think I'd rather be a machinist. But I can't write business letters with the short educational time I had, and I hated all of that stuff anyway. And not only did I hate the stuff, I didn't like the teachers either. They didn't like me and I didn't like them. And so all of the things that I could have had help with, many people tell you, oh, Mr. So-and-so used to come and put his arm around me and say, Bobby, you need some help, son. Why don't we see after school? We'll go over where you need a little bit of polishing and a little bit of direction in your life. No. Nobody ever did that. Not even my father did that. So anyway, my big brother Bill, he wrote a letter to Harland and Wolff. Begging was the way in those days. We beg your giving us an interview. We would beg it. And so I managed to get an interview by what he wrote. And so they didn't get into too much with my school because what I was going to be was a machinist, and you needed your hands. You didn't know you didn't have to have algebra and all this fancy stuff that I didn't bother with. So I got in there as an apprentice. I'd worked in Harland and Wolff. And then, of course, the war came along and I was still there. And so what they had was they had a fire rescue place, and there was a big steel bell in the middle of the whole Harland and Wolff. And when they sounded the air raid alarm, everybody went. And of course, not everybody could get into that bell. And if you were first in there, you were safe. But then they started the funny thing. The people that didn't get in had hammers. So they used to say, let's make room for me. Bang, bang, bang on a metal building. And after a while, you just say, to hell with it. I don't care about the bomber. I'm getting away from all this hammering stuff. And that was the kind of thing that went on there. And so anyway, I liked it, but it wasn't me, you know, it was not what I wanted to really do, but I wanted to use my hands. So I stayed there for about, maybe it was about a year and a half. And I rode my bike, and when I came back at night, that was like from 2 to 10. By the time I got back with my bike, and all you had was a little piece of tape over the little headlight. It was just a little slit. That's all you could have on your bike. And the cars were all the same. You couldn't have a headlight. It was just a little slit there to look through. But anyway, on the way home from there, I didn't know that they had put cement down for an air raid shelter that day. And they had poured all this big area where the footings were going to be for the air raid shelter, and it was going to be cement. And then I'm going along there, and all of a sudden I went right over the handlebars. They still had the 12-inch planks holding all the cement together, and they were all stapled to the ground, and I hit that thing, and it went right head over tea kettles into the soft cement. It didn't bury me, but I sure left a nice big figure where I was trying to get out of soft cement and get back on my bike. But that's the kind of things, you know, we ran into, and the war was just heating up then. And then my dad was always worried about my mom, because the bombers always came when it got dark. And so they had buses for people like my father and my mother, who went out each evening way out into the country to get away from the city to protect my mom. I had my apprenticeship to go to every day, and so I had to stay there. And so it was, the first few weeks was not too bad, but then they came in and they started bombing all of the linen factories. See, Belfast had a lot of linen factories in Belfast, Irish linen. They spun all that linen in there. And where did they put the anti-aircraft, we called them ACACs, but they're anti-aircraft defensive guns. They put them on top of all of the linen factories, on the top. They had flat roofs, and that's where they put all the guns. And so it didn't take the Germans long to know where all the guns were. So instead of bombing the strategic things, they got rid of all the guns and blew all the tops on those factories. And then they had open season. They could do anything they wanted. So anyway, I would go to bed at night, and there was a little radio on our what am I trying to say? On our headset. We had a headset, and we could get, you know, one place in Europe that played all dance music. And so I had this headset going to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, got, you know, showered, well, it wasn't showers, a wet mop over yourself. They didn't have showers, But anyway, and get ready to go. When I opened the door, I couldn't even get it hardly open. What had happened, they dropped the whole line of bombs 1 street away. And all the explosion and all the bricks and mortar with the bomb, they do strange things, explosions like that. And they blew all that concrete and bricks over the top of the houses between where the street they bombed and us. And so the whole front of our street was full of debris, and I couldn't even get out the door. And that was how I got up that one morning. I had to go out the back door and wheel my bike up through the entry and get out onto the road again to get to work. Yeah, and it was one of those things, they just wanted you as an apprentice to make money. They didn't really get into good schooling. See, here you go to school and everything, and the apprentice programs are overseen, that they're not just taking advantage of your labor. But there it was, they wanted cheap labor, and they only taught you what they wanted you to make. And anyway, that was the situation with that. And so it's a petty little thing, but it was important to us. They had all around the outside was glass to save the lights, so that the inside of the building was pretty light from all of the glass windows that they had all around the sides of it. And so anyway, we used to go out there and kick a ball around. We know everybody liked to play football and stuff. So during the lunch break, we'd go out and we'd kick that ball around. And so the superintendent came in there one day, and he saw us outside playing with a football, kicking it back and forth with all these windows around. So the first thing he thought, my God, those guys are going to bust one of the windows. So he got all the apprentices together and he said, no football during lunch break, no football. And so we thought, oh crap. So we watched that carefully for about 3-4 days, and one day he hadn't come around yet. So the guy says, let's go out and play a little football together.
And football is
soccer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, all of the bosses, even down to the ganger guys who were in charge of maybe 15 or 20 people, all wore bowler hats. They had white coats or gray coats and a bowler hat. So they said, you go over and you do this, and if you see the hat coming, yell, and then we can all get back in with our lunch and pretend everything is fine. But the only thing was, this particular day, the guy who was the supervisor came around the outside. He didn't do what he had normal just to catch us. And so somebody heard that he was coming. And everybody started scattering. And then some big mouth, as there usually is, said, don't panic. He can't send all of us home. And there was about 25 apprentices all in this big gang. And they said, don't bother running, he can't send all of us home. Oh, really? When he came out, he had company with him, and all they had was a scratch pad and they're writing all the names down. And we had 2 weeks, with 2 weeks suspension for all of the apprentices.
Whoa.
They cleaned that whole shop area where I worked, all up. No money, just don't come back for 2 weeks. And anyway, I'm just trying to get the background of where you are when you're working for a big corporation like that. And then for lunchtime, they had a steam line coming from where all the boilers and everything are. all along one of the dividing walls there, and they had all these little faucets with a hook on them, and you could hook your billy can, which was a can with a little wire loop on it. They call them billy cans. So you hooked your billy can on there and put your tea in, and then as soon as the bell went off, then you run for where your billy can was and pull the lever. That's the way it was all set up. But the guys were going a little bit too far. They were positioning everything and putting marks on their cans, and we got quite organized for to get your tea made. As soon as the bell went off, you spent maybe at least 5 minutes getting there and hooking your can on. So they got to a point where everybody was hooking their can on and had the tea already in there. And all you got to do is just pull the weight that was on there and open them up, and your tea was getting made while you were heading in there. Anyway, we started that. And the guy who was back to our supervisor, very mean character, he came along, he had seen that was one of the new trends, was putting your tea and getting your can up there and all hanging ready to get the hot water. Then he came along with his walking stick. He waited until everybody had gotten their cans up there, put the tea in there, and the bell hadn't gone off. So he preceded that bell by flipping with his walking stick all those cans off the faucets.
Oh.
So everybody's billy can with all your tea in there was all down in the dirt. Mm. See, I'm trying to give you a little bit of background and the adversarial relationship between the apprentices and the bosses. Yeah, and so I got making different parts for the steam engines and going into where they assembled the engines, and the steam engines on those big ships was like 4 stories high, and the pistons were like this. And you had like 6 pistons that height. And so all those things had to be all made and put together with the rings on them. And then on another stage in your apprentice, they had you go out there in the assembly of the engines, not to test them running, but to put everything together. And when you have the part of the crankshaft that goes like this, and that part from the crankshaft is attached to the pistons. And so they're sitting in big bearings. So you had to lower that part of the engine into the bearings and then move it apart and then lift the whole thing up and look where the little scratches were. And so then the scratch would be the high part there. So then you had to get them with a little hand scraper and scrape that little bit of metal off there, and then lower those things down again and move the crankshaft to see if there's any more marks. And that's all the kind of physical stuff we used to do. And anyway, so eventually I got restless feet. I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to do something else. And so I had been building a Whitley bomber at home out of matchsticks. And it was about this big, this Whitley bomber, and I had to put the wings and all in just as an evening project for myself. And so everybody was saving me the big stick matches, you'd strike it and light with the thing and then blow them out. And then they keep them for me to help build this big airplane. So I had that airplane done, and then I joined, it was called the ATC. And that was an air transport group. And they were teaching young people a flight instrument controls on airplanes, and what they did and all of that. So I joined that group, the ATC. So anyway, I got in the Air Training Corps. And I loved it there. And I thought, how can I get in the Air Force? So I went down to the recruiting office and I said, I want to join the Air Force. They said, but where's your school leaving certificate? I said, I don't have one. And they said, oh, well, in that case, the only thing available for you is working with the ground crew. Whatever the ground crew want you to do to sweep up or go get something, that's all we've got for you. But I thought, no, I don't like that. But I stuck with the ATC. And so one day a guy says to me, have you been looking at the newspaper? And I says, no. He said, well, look at the newspaper, because they were losing so many planes over Germany. And we were sending these aged bombers that we had over there, slow, poorly armed, and the Germans were just making hay out of shooting those RAF bombers down. They were away from the 1800 thinking, you know. But anyway, so it said, go talk to them because they've got a program out. And it's called PNB, which is Pilot Navigator Bomb Aimer. And it's a total thing that you sign up for. You can sign up for a bomb maker or a pilot or a navigator. You have to go into this program. And then they decide, after you're with there for 3 months, when they've given you training, what you're good at. And if they don't like what you are, you go back to where you were just a member. And so anyway, I was getting ready to join that. And they said, okay, but you still have to undergo an examination. And we need your school leaving certificate as the minimum to get in. So I went back to the school, Alum Grove, where I had spent most of my educational secondary years. Didn't know very much, and just terrible. I got an orange card. Most guys got a nice big typewritten letter about this subject and what the grade was, blah, blah, blah. I just had an orange sheet. It was about that big. And it gave all the subjects, and then off to one side was acceptable and what the grade was, or not acceptable. I went up to pick that up. This is what I needed to get considered for this PNB scheme, Pilot Navigator Bomb Aimer. They won't touch you until you go through that step. So I took that out from the headmaster, gave that to me because I told you I dropped out at 13. And terrible, terrible school. I just hated schoolwork. And anyway, so we get this nice orange card, and I had Robert Smyth, you know, blah, blah, blah. So many years attendance and all that. And I looked at the right-hand side, and it was negative, negative, negative. I didn't know anything. I hadn't been there, and more, I couldn't have cared less about doing homework and stuff like that. And my parents they never cared. They never asked me, did I get any homework? I just, as soon as my supper was over, outside playing with the rest of the guys. And there was another guy just like me, and this guy's name was Jack McDowell, and he was a big guy, and he hated school like I did. And we both got caned together for not bringing in homework. Every day we both got caned with the cane on your hand for not having homework. Yeah. And we sat on the outside of the room where they had the big heaters. They had the big steam heaters, right? This big sheet metal, the big heavy heaters with the steam in there. We sat next to those, and in the summer they were beautifully cool. When you got caned on your hands for not having homework, you sat with your hands on there. It was in the aisle, see? And you got that aisle seat and you just reached across there to cool your hands off after getting caned a lot. So here I am with this orange thing. And I looked at that and I thought, I can't give anybody that. They're going to laugh at me. So I just got that thing and went like that. Tore it all up and threw it away. Then I went back and I said they had lost my record. And the guy says, okay. He says, we have a written test also, you know. And I said, okay. So anyway, there was some easy things, you know, easy tests. But then they had one cooker in there. I look at that thing. It was about 60% of the score. And I look at that thing, I have no bloody idea how to do that. So now here is the funny part. I just passed that up totally and went for all the easy stuff. So when all of the papers had been turned in and everything, they called you in and had a chat with you. Mm-hmm. And the first thing they said, why didn't you do anything with that numbers that was 60% of the whole thing? You didn't even touch it. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I just said, well, actually, sir, I said, I just speeded past that because I thought that I might as well pick up something else real quick and then go back to that. And I said that I just didn't have the time. And then I thought, oh my God, I've lost the biggest score of all. This is honest to God. And so he said, all right. He said, I've got other people to interview and I'm going to call you back. So after that, we had a little break while he's interviewing other people. So we're sitting together and I was sitting beside this one guy and I said, tell me, how did you even figure that question out that was in there? And he said, well, you know, we all got that at school. And I said, I didn't. I either wasn't listening or I didn't do it. And I said, show me how to go about that. And the guy said, A, do this, B, do this, C, do that. And I said, now, talk slowly. Let's go back all of that again. So then when all the questioning was done, true to heart, they called me back and the guy said, okay, you said that you knew that question and you had set it aside because you wanted to get all the easy stuff first. And I said, that's pretty much true. And you know, that guy just took that test from inside there. He slid it across the desk, give me a pencil and a piece of paper. He said, show me. A, B, C, and I shoved it back over there. He said, now you learn something from here. Take the easy stuff first. I said, well, it was still pretty familiar to me, but I thought the other stuff, I'd just get that out of the road. I passed. And so I got enlisted as a pilot navigator bomb aimer. And so I joined the Air Force. I got inducted in there. We went to London on a July day, into London, and we went to Lord's Cricket Ground. And Lord's Cricket Ground, they were there and they were doing the FFI, and that's free from infection. And when you went to Lord's Cricket Ground, you all stood on a big long line in the pavilion there, inside the pavilion, and you dropped your drawers. And this medic came along, and then they had a guy with blue crap that could paint on you. I don't know what it was, but it was some kind of a blue, whatever kills whatever. And so this guy went along, and whenever they stopped, then everybody could see that you were stopped for some reason, whether it was an infection or whatever. And as soon as they stopped, the whole place in the line went, Ooh.
Oh my God.
I'm telling you, they're all young guys, you know. And so this was the answer at Lord's Cricket Ground. And I've always told people I've hung out at Lord's Cricket Ground, meaning I had everything hanging out there. So anyway, I got past that pretty good. And so then I was in. And they had a shortage of regular uniforms, so they gave us the greatcoats, or the big heavy overcoat. They call them the greatcoat. That covers all of your uniform and everything, and that's all they had was those greatcoats. I didn't have any uniform. And so they issued all of these, and we were walking around after that. They started drilling us and stuff on those big goddamn overcoats. In the summertime, we were doing the drilling because we didn't get actual uniform for about another 3 weeks until they got.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then they were keeping us at a hotel, and I still remember where that hotel was. Yeah. Anyway, that's where the station does. And then they started bombing London, and they moved in a big gun off a ship, off one of those battleships. And they put that up on top of one of the hills in London, along the outside of London. They put that big gun up there. And then when the sirens went off that the Germans were coming, they'd fire that big naval gun and it would go boom! And you could hear that all over London, those big shells going off, shooting blanks. And everybody was saying, go get them. You know, everybody was all boosted up. Look at their guns. Look at the stuff we were shooting at those guys. I don't think we ever shot anything down with that.
Oh.
Yeah, all of that stuff. So then they moved us into a place called church something. Anyway, it was out on the coast, on the channel.
Oh.
And so they moved us out there where the White Cliffs of Dover are.
Oh my.
They put us out there. And then it was getting later in the war, but the Germans started their V1 bombs. And that was the pilotless bombs. So what the V1s were, they had big chutes built, angled, see, concrete runways. And so they would put this big bomb on there. And the bomb had the simplest engine in the whole world. It just had a nozzle to suck the petrol out of, and then it had a little flap, and the rest of it was explosive. So they aimed these long ramps at London, and then they would send a couple of planes over to measure the time between takeoff and when you reached London, and they knew how much gas that little engine would burn between here and London. And then when it ran out of gas, it just quit putting. And so it would go put, 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 about that speed. And it was just a little ram thing. The pressure, when they took it off up that ramp, that little flap on the front with the air would open up and suck the gas out of the nozzle. And then they had a live spark plug back here, and it would go boom and close that, and then the same thing. More air would come in and suck the gas and ignite it, and it would go boom. And that's that whole engine.
Wow.
And they had a bomb behind that. And so they were called the flying bombs. And German had all of these along the coast, built these V1s, he called them. That was his victory weapon. Now here's the thing. That was working up to a point, but they said, hey, we've got fighters. When they start launching this crap, we're going to launch a bunch of fighters. And they're just going to come up to those things and fly beside them and then turn around and turn the machine guns on those bombs and blow them up before they get to London. But unfortunately, some of those bombs, when they blew up, would throw a bunch of pieces of the plane's wings and stuff, and the planes would crap up. They would have to land. And so sending fighters out to follow them and blow them up was a hazardous job because, you know, you're shooting a bomb. And when that bomb goes off, all that shit is flying back because you're right behind it. So then they thought, now what are they going to do? And then the new defense was, don't shoot them. Fly alongside of those bombs with wings on them. Put your wing in below their wing and go like that and flip them off course. Because they didn't have any guidance in there. Because, see, they did that on the station where they were launching them. They had calculated the wind, see, and they put the angle that when it got to London it would explode. But there was no guidance. And so they just flipped them off like that. So these bombs were dropping all around, and all the farms and everything were getting the hell bombed out of them. Yeah. See, this is all weird. Now, we were stationed there, and I used to hear those V1s going pat, 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 pat.
Oh my, you heard them.
Pardon?
You heard those bombs?
Oh yes, we were right at the entrance to the channel that come up to London. Oh yeah.
My.
Because they came from the continent across the sea, they come across the
Channel.
the ocean there. And they're right over the top of East Church where we were. Oh yeah. And so that went on for a while. And so then they decided, now we've got all these PNB guys. Now, we've got to take those people and educate them. Because all the fighter pilots were all college guys. See, people didn't know that. But most of the RAF were all college guys that belonged to the flying clubs.
Oh.
See, the flying clubs with the little Cessnas and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's all they were doing. But see, those guys had all the flight experience. And so they took them and made RAF pilots out of them and taught them how to fly and fight and maneuver. So all of those pilots, they were getting knocked off between the bombs and the Germans shooting them down because they had sent a lot of fighters along with the bombers to protect them. So anyway, so they decided they needed a lot of backups for the bombers and the guys that were in the bombers, the bomb aimers and the navigators. Every bomber has all of that in there. He sits up there and flies the plane and takes care of everything of the attack. And then you've got the bomb aimer sitting in the nose, and then the pilot gives it over to him, and that's the guy who says, left, 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 hold it, hold it, hold it, and then lose 100 feet altitude, tells the pilot what to do, and then when he's got the target just right, they had a Norton bomb sight. It was a big thing like that, and a whole bunch of dogs on it, airspeed and all that stuff. So that was the bomb aimer's job. And then the navigator was the guy to find out where the target was and tell the pilot how to get there. So you see, you had all these little cells on each bomber. It wasn't just the pilot going out there. He wasn't that smart. He just took care of getting the bomber there and dropping the bomb, and then the bomb aimer, and then the navigator to make sure he got to the right target. So all of this stuff, you know, it's a massive thing. And so because all of the RAF pilots, most of them were all college level guys. And then they decided that all these PNB guys, like I would join, pilot, navigator, bomb aimers, they were just normal people at normal school. And so they decided the first thing we got to do is educate these people. So they had a place in Edinburgh, and it was staffed by the University of Edinburgh's staff, and they were all the instructors. And so they took over a building where there was a big, huge place for retarded children. They moved them into one half, and they gave all the PNB guys the other half. So the university instructors for like current affairs and astronavigation and all this polished stuff, they would come from the university and lecture each day. You had a whole day full of lecturing and how to behave as a gentleman and all that stuff. They wanted these bomb aimers and navigators for the future to have that polish that the pilots had. See? Mm-hmm. And so that was all part of the training. And then later on, they give us all of the hard stuff to go into separate school down in South Devonshire for actually, operating machine guns and navigation. Those guys that were in that category, then they started telling them the real stuff. But all the 6 months in Edinburgh was all polishing you up at the same time. And so we ate at the British restaurant for to go. And in England and Scotland, they had to billet soldiers. They had to billet military in their houses.
And that means to house them and care
Well,
for
see,
them.
here, it's against the Constitution. You cannot force people here to house military personnel. It's unconstitutional. But over there, it's anything that they can do. So they went down this one big area, Ragledge Road it was, and they had all these big mansions down there, and they usually had, maybe like a guy who did the driving for you, mm-hmm. and then they had somebody come in and do the cooking, all wealthy people, mm-hmm. but they usually had an extra bedroom. And so the guy who owned the butcher shop, they moved me in there, and when they delivered my biscuits, they called them, they were sectional of mattresses about that wide, and then you got 3 of those to make the bed, not those. So when they delivered all that stuff to this mansion that I stayed in, they took me in and showed me this beautiful big room. And then they arrived with all this biscuits and gray blankets and all that stuff. She says, take all of that stuff and put it behind that wardrobe over there. I don't want to ever see that stuff in this bedroom. She put a nice new bed in there. Oh. But see, then there was that whole complex that nobody else but us knew about. See, nobody had heard of PNB anywhere but us. And they had to raise our status so that we were smarter and more polished to be part of the Royal Air Force group.
Wow.
Yeah, see, so they attached a lot to that, mm-hmm. see? And so that's the way it went.
Did you finish the training then?
See, the problem was, and then we did some preliminary training, and that's where they settled you whether you were going to be a pilot or a navigator or what. And they take you up like in a tiger moth, and they would say, okay, we're going to do this. All of a sudden, they'd put the plane into a spin, and you'd be spinning around like this, and they'd say, what's going on here? And they want to hear we're in a spin. They say, well, what are you going to do about it? And what you do opposite rudder. You stop it from turning. And then the nose goes into a dive and then you pull it back. But they tested you and then people were panicking because the ground's going around like this and guys panicking. Well, they got wiped out and they were bomb aimers or navigators from then on. So I was all in flight school. And then I got tied up with a Scotsman and we became good friends, and he married a girl in Edinburgh. Well, we were up there in Edinburgh, now we're down in England, in Manchester. And there in Manchester, we were in the park in Manchester, England. That's where all the guys that were going to be leaving their country, ready to be shipped down to the States and things like that. That's where the flying schools were. We had a lot of Texas. Guys go to Texas.
Oh, they sent Englishmen to Texas to.
Pardon?
They sent some of your crew, the different crew, to Texas to get flight training.
Oh, absolutely. That's
Oh,
where
I
most
never
of
heard
them
that.
got their wings.
Oh,
Most of them got their wings in Texas, yeah.
oh my.
And some went to Canada, yeah. But flying schools in Texas were big. We were waiting on to be shipped out. And like I was going to tell you, this other guy that became very good friends with us, we knew each other in Edinburgh, so we used to do a lot of drinking and stuff together. But anyway, he got married. And so then when he came back from being married, back to Heaton Park, where I was, waiting to get shipped out, see? And then the days were going on and no shipment and everybody was getting cheesed off, as they called it. And they were saying, oh, the hell with it, why don't we all get out of here wasting our time? The days were going away. We were there for about 3 months. So you can imagine a bunch of young guys all living in Heaton Park and sneaking out at night and all that stuff. But anyway, so he called me out one day and he says, why don't we go into business? Because we're coming close to the end of the war. And he says, we can go out, because that was part of the whole deal, that I could leave anytime I wanted from the Air Force, anytime. Yeah, see, we were all volunteers, see? And that was the thing. And so he said, why don't we just go out of business? I said, well, what would you like to do? He said, I've got an idea of starting a burglar alarm. He says, you're pretty good at doing stuff like that. He says, and why don't we just leave here and go back to Edinburgh and we'll go into business, because the war's going to be ending pretty quick. Foolish me, the only thing I ever wanted to do was fly. And I listened to him. So I went back and I was there for about 2 months and I fell in love with 2 girls at the same time.
Oh no.
Two girls at the same time. And I had to make up my mind which one I was going to get married to. I loved them. They were nice girls. I mean, I had no problem loving 2. But anyway, what happened, I chose the wrong one. Because one of them was a Catholic. And she had told me, she says, you know, if we get married or anything like that, the church is going to raise your children, are going to be Catholics, you're going to have to agree to it. They're going to adopt the mother's religion. And I thought, no, not from Belfast. If I went back and told them I'd married a Catholic, they would be ready to kill me. They would have threw me out. My family would have disowned me. If I'd married a Catholic and had Catholic grandkids. So anyway, the other girl I married, and it was okay. It was okay, but it just wasn't made in heaven. And so she was spending too much time at work, and some other guy was making a pass at her, you know, type thing. And so we moved out. We were living with her mother. So we moved out and we had our own, they call them button bands. That's the term that they use in Scotland. And a button band is a one-room little place where you eat, and you've got a bed there in the one side. And it's called a wee button band. And it's the cheapest way to live. So we had a wee button band, and like I said, she got in love with some other guy who was messing around, and so I told her it wasn't going to be that way. And I was getting ready. Oh, another thing was, with this PACT, you could get, when I wanted to go to Canada, this was by the government. It was a government subsidy after the war. You could go to Canada, Australia, or stay where you are. And it was £5 to go to Canada and £10 to go to Australia with a job.
Wow.
And you had to sign up for 2 years before you left. Now I'm sitting there in Edinburgh thinking, will I go to Canada? Will I go to Australia? Or will I stay where I was? No, I wasn't about to stay where I was with the old country thing. If you didn't have an education, you ain't going anywhere. I can tell you. Most people are in good schools and have all management stuff. But so I'm still sitting there with all of this stuff. And then a guy in the same place where I was staying, they said they were going to America. And I said, you're going to America? I said, would you tell me what the future looks like there? You know, what's the job business for a machinist? And they said, we'll do just that. And you know, they emigrated, and then they sent me back documents of support. And you had to have those back then. That if somebody sponsored you, you had to have a signed document that you will support those people, and they become a tax burden in any way, and they have to take money from the taxes to support them. You're it, and that's signed of support. And they sent those to me, and that's how I come I got here.
Awesome. Awesome.
But what a weird thing. I've saddled with that big question. Canada, Australia, with an own job, but you had to agree to be 2 years. It's a good stopping point.
We're gonna good stopping point for today. Thank you, Dad. This
That's
was
just
awesome.
A fraction.
This was wonderful. So our next time when we start up, we'll start with Bobby Gets to America.